Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Chapter 46. Beelzebub explains to his grandson the significance of the form and sequence which he chose for expounding the information concerning man. After the process of taking in the second being food, Beelzebub did not immediately return from the Jamich Chunatra, where they usually spent their time in conversation, but first he went to his Kesha. Kesha is the name given to those compartments on spaceships which on terrestrial steamers are called cabins. Beelzebub first entered his Kesha in order to cool his already extremely decrepit tail a little in a certain liquid, to which he was compelled to have recourse from time to time on account of his old age. When, on returning from his Kesha, he silently entered that section of the ship Karnak where they usually spent their time, he unexpectedly saw the following picture, unusual for him. His beloved grandson, Hussein, was standing with his face to the corner, his hands covering his eyes, weeping. Beelzebub, deeply moved, quickly approached Hussein and in a voice full of anxiety asked him, "What is the matter, my dear boy? Are you really weeping?" Hussein wished to answer, but it could be seen that the sobbing of his planetary body prevented him from speaking. Only after a rather long time, when the planetary body of Hussein was a little calmed, did he, gazing at his grandfather with very sad eyes, but yet with a smile of affection, say, "Do not worry about me, my dear grandfather. This state of mind will soon pass. Evidently during the last Diagnostic, I actively pondered a great deal, and in all probability from this unaccustomed, newly tempoed functioning, the general tempo of the functioning of the whole of my common presence has changed. And now, until this new tempo of my mentation harmonizes with the other tempos of my common functioning already established in me, such abnormalities as this weeping will probably proceed in me. I must confess, my dear grandfather, that the fundamental cause for the arising in my common presence of such a state was the arising by association in my mentation of the picture of the situation and destiny of those ill-fated higher being bodies which, owing to various chance happenings, arise and are formed in the common presences of the terrestrial three-brained beings. These associative thoughts, with a proportionately increasing impulse in me of sadness, began still in the Jamich Chunatra during the sacred feeding of the second being food. The thought about them arose in my mentation by association when I was overfilled with happiness from all that took place there. In me it began to think, concerning these ill-fated three-brained beings about whom you have given me so much information during recent times, that only thanks to the consequences of the properties of that something accursed for them, which through causes not depending on their essences at all, but exclusively only on the unforeseeingness of certain most high sacred individuals, was implanted in the common presences of their ancestors. Not only their higher being bodies which are coded in them, but also they themselves, as ordinary beings, are forever deprived of the possibility of experiencing that bliss which is actualized in the presences of all kinds of relatively independent individuals during such a sacred feeding of the second being food in which we have just participated." When Hussein finished speaking, Beelzebub looked long and fixedly into his eyes, and then, with a smile which revealed a being impulse of love, he said, "Now I see that during the last Diagnostic, you indeed actively pondered a great deal. Or, as certain of your contemporary favorites would express themselves, during this time you did not inwardly sleep. Now let us take our usual places and speak about that theme to which I already once promised you to refer, and which will be wholly appropriate to the present occurrence. When they were already seated, and when Ahun had also arrived, Beelzebub began to speak as follows. First of all, I shall begin by expressing outwardly in words the impulse of joy concerning you which proceeds from within my common presence. I personally am very, very glad for this crisis which has occurred and still continues in you. I am glad chiefly because your sincere sobbing which I saw, and which was manifested just at this present period of your existence, when you, according to the laws of the great hero pass, are on the threshold of the being of responsible being. That is, at just that age when every kind of data for those functionings which during the responsible existence of each three-brained being compose his individuality is crystallized and acquires a harmonious tempo in the common functioning, gives me the assurance that the approximate cognizance, or even only the sensing of, so to say, the taste of this being joy of mine, which is at first glance not logical, is very desirable, and even necessary for you at the period of your responsible existence, as well as for all three-brained beings who have reached responsible age. I shall therefore, first of all, explain to you about it. Your weeping gives me the assurance also that in your future responsible existence there will also be in your common presence those being data which are the foundation of the essence of every bearer of divine reason, and which are even formulated by our common Father in words placed over the chief entrance of the holy planet Purgatory, decreeing the following: Only he may enter here who puts himself in the position of the other results of my labors. This is what your essence manifested in this present case, when, personally experiencing bliss, and accidentally remembering by association that others were deprived of it, you sincerely sobbed with the whole of your presence. I am glad for you, more particularly because the said data necessary for your being begin to function in you just at the time when there are crystallized and formed in you all those being data, the crystallization of which does not at all depend upon a being's own reason, but depends exclusively only upon surrounding beings, external conditions, and the most great common cosmic Irani-Ranu Manj. Well then, now we can return to my intended theme. That is, why during the whole of our journey on this spaceship I have told you so much, and in such a sequence, about the three-brained beings breeding on the planet Earth. The point is that when I returned to our dear Caritas, I, being free from any other being duties whatsoever, voluntarily took upon myself the responsible guidance of your finishing Osciano for the being of a responsible being, or, as your favorites would say, your education. And in view of the fact that the present period of your existence is for you just that period when, in general, in three-brained beings, all those functions present in them are harmonized, which in totality during the period of responsible existence just actualize in them that form of mentation, which is called sane mentation. I, in consequence of this, when we set out on this journey in the spaceship Karnak, thought of profiting by this time to help you so that the harmonizing of the functioning of yours and the formation of your future active mentation, which depends on them, should proceed precisely in that order, of the correctness of which I became convinced with the whole of my presence during the process of my long personal existence. When, at the beginning of our journey, I noticed that you were very interested in the three-brained beings of the planet Earth, I then decided, under the aspect of gratifying that interest of yours, to tell you everything about them in such a way that there should be crystallized in you for your future being associations that required what are called ego plasticuri, without any admixture of doubt. For this, I have in almost all my tales strictly held to the two following principles. The first, not to say anything as if it were my own personal opinion, in order that data necessary for your own convictions should not be crystallized in you in a prepared form according to the opinions of another. And in accordance with the second principle, to relate to you in just such an order and in such a premeditated and selected sequence about all the events which proceeded on this planet Earth connected with the arising among these three-brained beings who have taken your fancy of various gradually progressing inner and outer abnormalities in the process of their ordinary being existence, the total of which has given them their present desolate and almost inescapable state, in order that you should be able to marshal your own subjective reasoning concerning all causes only on the basis of certain facts which I have told you. I decided to do this in order that many diversely essenced ego plasticuries for your future logical confrontation should be crystallized in corresponding localizations in your common presence, and also in order that from active mentation the proper elaboration in you of the sacred substances of Abrus Donis and Helc Donis for the purpose of coating and perfecting both of your higher being parts should proceed more intensively. And now, my boy, in order that what I am saying at this moment should become still more comprehensible to you, I find it necessary to repeat in another and more definite form about the difference already mentioned by me many times for different motives between what are called knowledge and understanding present in three-brained beings in general. In order that this difference should stand out more clearly, I shall again take as an example the ordinary reason of your favorites. If one makes an analogy between this, as they themselves call it, conscious reason of theirs, which is completely fixed in contemporary beings, and that reason of three-brained beings in general who breed on other planets of our great megalocosmos, then the former, which they have in them, might be called the reason of knowing, and the latter the reason of understanding. The conscious reason of understanding, which in general it is proper for three-brained beings to have, is a something which blends with their common presence, and therefore information of every kind perceived with this reason becomes forever their inseparable part. The information perceived with this reason, or results obtained thanks to being contemplation of the totality of formerly perceived information, however a being himself may change and whatever changes may proceed in the spheres around him, will be forever a part of his essence. And as for that reason, which for most of your contemporary favorites has become habitual, and which I called the reason of knowing, every kind of new impression perceived through this reason, and likewise every kind of intentionally or simply automatically obtained result from formerly perceived impressions, is only a temporary part of the being, and might result in them exclusively only in certain surrounding circumstances, and on the definite condition that the information which constitutes all this foundation and entirety should without fail be from time to time, so to say, freshened or repeated. Otherwise, these formerly perceived impressions change of themselves, and even entirely, so to say, evaporate out of the common presence of the three-brained being. Although in respect of the sacred Triamazikamno, the process of the arising of both kinds of being reason flows equally, Yet the fulfilling factors for the actualization of its three separate holy forces are different. Namely, for the formation of the reason of knowing, the formerly perceived contradictory impressions crystallized in any one of the three localizations which three-brained beings have serve as the affirming and denying factors, and the new impressions proceeding from without serve in this case as the third factor. And for the reason of understanding, these factors are as follows. The first, that is the sacred affirming, is newly perceived impressions of any localization which has at the given moment what is called the center of gravity functioning. The second, or sacred denying, is the corresponding data present in another of his localizations. And the third factor is what is called the being autokolizikners, or as they otherwise call it, hudasbabbognari, the sense of which name signifies the results of the persevering actualizing of the striving towards the manifestation of one's own individuality. By the way, you might as well hear, still once more, even if you do know it, that the said being autokolizikners are formed in the presences of three-brained beings in general in all three localizations exclusively only from the results of the actualization of being partikdog duty. That is to say, thanks to those factors which, from the very beginning of the arising of the three-brained beings, our unibeing common Father designed to be the means for self-perfection. It is these same formations in the common presences of three-brained beings which are actualized as the third holy force of the sacred Triyamazikamno for the arising of the reason of understanding. Only thanks to this factor, in the process of the blending of newly perceived impressions of every kind in the presences of three-brained beings, are there crystallized on the basis of the sacred Triyamazikamno data for one's own cognizance and understanding proper to the being alone. And likewise, exclusively only during such processes of the crystallization of the data for the consciousness in the presences of three-brained beings does there proceed what is called Zerno-Foucauldian friction, thanks to which the sacred substances abrustonis and helktonis are chiefly formed in them for the coding and perfecting of their higher parts. I must tell you here that only the newly perceived impressions which are crystallized in the said order, and which are newly arisen in beings from conscious mentation, settle in the localizations of beings, just as those series of formerly fixed data which are similar to these impressions and which correspond to those already present in them. And new impressions, crystallized in another order, that is, through the reason of knowing, settle in the being localizations at random, quite without any kind of, so to say, classification. All these new impressions settle in the series of those former impressions which almost always have nothing in common with them. Well then, it is chiefly for this reason that everything which has been newly learned settles in the presences of three-brained beings who have only the reason of knowing, and always remains only simply as information without any kind of cognizance by the whole of their being. And therefore new data of every kind formed and fixed in this way for the three-brained beings who have the reason of knowing have, in respect of their use, no significance at all for the welfare of their own subsequent existence. Moreover, the duration of the decrystallization of this kind of fixed impressions depend on the quantity and the quality of the impulses engendered in the given being. As regards this latter fact ensuing from the already degenerated functioning of the reason proper to the three-brained beings, and which most of your contemporary favorites today already have, one also very rarely used saying of our respected teacher Mullah Nasruddin is remembered in me by association and is expressed by the following words. As soon as anything is needed, it seems that it is filthy and eaten by mice. Although every kind of what your favorites call knowledge, which they have, and which has been acquired in the common presences of beings in the said manner, is also subjective, yet it has absolutely nothing in common with what is called objective knowledge. Well then, my boy, in order that the mentioned Zerno-Foucaultian friction should be obtained in beings, and that at the same time the crystallization of the new perceptions should proceed for the reason of understanding, I, already knowing very well what are called the laws of the fixing and unfixing of ideas in localizations, the details of which laws, to mention it by the way, I learned also thanks to the three-brained beings who have taken your fancy, during my sojourn among them as professional hypnotist, had in view, during my tales, among many other necessary principles in respect of the current perception of new information through guidance from without, always to keep also to the same inevitable rule, so that the gradualness of the enlarging of, as is said, the quintessence of the information should proceed in you with the entire absence of the being impulses of indignation, offense, vexation, and so forth. In respect of the sequence of my information to you, and of the results of your essence understanding, I must still tell you that if, when I first noticed your interest in the three-brained beings who arise on the planet Earth, I would have given from the very beginning concerning every event only my personal conviction, and the opinions which had become fixed in me about them during the period of my observations, and only afterwards would have begun to give you the abundant and many-sided totality of information already related by me, then all these facts I related would have been taken in by you without your own being logical confrontation, and the data which had been crystallized for this information would have settled in your corresponding localizations only simply as information, without any genuine being understanding of them. That is why in all my tales about the three-brained beings who breed on the planet Earth, I was guided by this, that on the one hand, there should be crystallized in the corresponding localizations of your common presence many diversely formed data for your future being association concerning all the totalities or branches of objective knowledge, and on the other hand, that the process of Zerno-Foucaultian friction should proceed intensively in your common presence, and that that result should be obtained which I have just witnessed in the way you answered my question, "Why are you weeping?" Now, my boy, as I've already become more or less convinced that the time I have spent has not been in vain, and that my tales about the three-brained beings of your planet who have taken your fancy have brought you the benefit I expected, then I think we might stop talking about them, so as not to evoke the process of active mentation in you any longer. Besides, time is short, for we shall soon be on our dear planet. Nevertheless, I must now briefly explain and strictly command you that as long as our journey lasts, that is to say, as long as we speak about the three-brained beings of the planet Earth, you should try, with the reason you have in your presence, so to arrange that certain of those functions which flow in you, and which in general give three-brained beings the possibility of active mentation, should remain inactive, or as is said, should rest. That is to say, those functions should rest in you, which during this time participated more intensively than usual in your active mentation, the functions of which do not depend on the essence of beings, but depend exclusively on what is called the harmony of the common cosmic tempo. By the way, you should always remember that the reason of any being and the intensity of the action of this reason depend on the correct functioning of all the separate parts of his whole presence. For instance, all the functionings of the planetary body, and the body itself are the chief parts of a being. But the separate functionings, as well as the whole of this body itself, without other of the spiritualized parts of the being, are only a dependent cosmic formation, conscious of nothing. And therefore, on the basis of what you once called the common universal pillar of justice, each spiritualized part of a being must always be just towards this dependent and unconscious part, and not require of it more than it is able to give. Just as everything else in the megalocosmos, in order that the planetary body of a being may correctly serve its chief part, that is to say, in order that this auxiliary part of the whole being should properly serve his essence itself, this essence must always be just and make demands on it only according to its inherent possibilities. Besides this question of justice, it is necessary to act toward the unconscious part of a being in such a way as to make it possible for certain functions to remain inactive from time to time, in order that it might be always possible for this unconscious part, gradually and in its time, to blend its newly acquired subjective tempos with the objective tempos of our common megalocosmos. One must notice that in the megalocosmos the blending of tempos proceeds only kasnu-kiskernian, that is, as your favorites would say, with law-conformable gradualness. And so, if you wish that your active mentation during your future responsible existence should proceed correctly and productively, you must now, if such a mentation has already begun in you, and if such an inner process has undesirable consequences for your planetary body, not occupy yourself at all for a while with such mentation. However much you may like it, and however greatly it may interest you, otherwise desonakuazance will result in you. That is to say, only one part of your whole presence will acquire another tempo, and in consequence you will become again, as your favorites would say, lopsided. By the way, most of your favorites, particularly the contemporary ones, when they become responsible, become just such lopsided beings. In short, only by a gradual change of the tempo of one part of the whole is it possible to change the tempo of all this whole without injuring it. I find it necessary to repeat that the active mentation in a being and the useful results of such active mentation are in reality actualized exclusively only with the equal degree functionings of all his three localizations of the results spiritualized in his presence, called thinking center, feeling center, and moving motor center.